Thank you very much, Honourable House Chairperson. This amendment bill originates out of a Constitutional Court directive for the revision of a Principal Act, which dates back to July 2013. The deadline has since been extended on 2 occasions. Besides the Principal Act being woefully outdated, the amendment bill is also a great necessity as we seek to bring national legislation in line with current thinking on animal welfare practices. What is considered cruel practice today was not necessarily the case in 1935. Humanity has evolved, and so should our thinking evolve, and extend to all sentient beings, and I purposefully include animals under this category. If one looks at the very definition of the word sentience, it is the ability to see, feel, hear, smell, and taste. Animals clearly fall within this category. However, we still see numerous examples of animal cruelty within our country, from the inhumane practice of canned lion hunting to circus animals being trained through abusive methods and kept prisoner in the most squalid of environments, to the shark nets along the coastlines that kill whatever sea creature has the misfortune of venturing too close to our beaches. And it begs the question, have studies ever been conducted on the welfare of the marine life that inhabit our big ocean aquariums? And are we addressing the plight of animals kept in our zoos? Just recently, Honourable Minister, we saw the huge public outcry over the terrible living conditions of an orangutan in the KwaZulu-Natal Zoological Gardens. This animal spent 30 years in solitary confinement and is a living example of the value we currently place on the welfare of some animals in South Africa. While the amendment bill speaks to specific issues around the Principal Act, we must take the opportunity to open up the debate on the larger issue of animal welfare in South Africa. Our animals are our heritage, and we are the custodians of some of the most magnificent animals on our planet. We should therefore be setting an example for the rest of the world, not be a cautionary tale of a country that cares very little for its animals and whose animals are always for sale to the highest foreign bidder. Are we doing enough, Minister? And are we conscious of the plight of our animals? And do we even care? These are some of the questions that must inform this debate. Before I conclude, Honourable House Chairperson, I think we must also thank the NSPCA and other NGOs that do great work in the protection of our animals. Minister, this amendment bill is a step in the right direction, but it's simply not enough. I look forward to a South Africa that champions the protection of animals on this continent as vociferously as the IFP has done over many decades. Thank you.
Sibonge, Mhlonishwa Ncwabe.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Chair. The bill tabled here today primarily seeks to amend the Section 2 and 3 of the Performing Animal Protection Act. These sections, as my colleagues have said, had been declared constitutionally invalid by the Constitutional Court in July 2013. The Performing Animal Protection Act, in its current form, has been in force since 1935. And it was hoped that amendments would go further than only addressing the sections deemed inconsistent with the Constitution. The lacuna which had been created by the Declaration of Constitutional Invalidity has been filled by the provisions of a national licensing office. The amendment also prescribed procedures for the application for a license to exhibit or train exhibit animals, as well as licenses for using animals for safeguarding. Also noteworthy is the provision for an appeals process, which the NFP commends, because an appeals process is an important check and balance on the abuse of administrative power. We also welcome the increased penalty fine for exhibiting, training for exhibition, or the use of animals for safeguarding without a license. We believe that the increase from 4,000 to 20,000 will act as a powerful deterrent to rogue operators who would otherwise be tempted to circumvent the provisions of the Act. The opportunity to amend the Performing Animals Protection Act does not arise often. The NFP therefore supports the observations contained in several public representations that the opportunity should have been taken to amend other provisions of the Act which are either not in line with the new constitutional order or public opinion or out of date. The amendment offered the legislature an opportunity not only to comply with the Constitutional Court judgment, but also to update the Act in such a way that takes into account an important development in scientific knowledge in relation to the welfare of animals. We are, however, disappointed that the Act, once it has been promulgated, will not extend to aquatic animals, such as dolphins, seals, and sea lions, which are often used for entertainment in South Africa. Neither will the Act expressly criminalize cruelty to performing or safeguarding or guarding animals during the training. Despite our disappointment, Chair, on what I've been outlined, the National Freedom Party supports the Performing Amendment Protection Bill as tabled here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mhlonishwa Fildan.
The United Democratic Movement supports the Performing Animal Protection Amendment Bill. Animals regularly appear in adverts and other entertainment sites. So they entertain and make money for various affected parties, like their owners, transport practitioners, energy and food suppliers, as well as venue owners. It is said that a few years ago, an advertising agency that wanted to show a mouse running along a long wall couldn't do that. Mice do not generally move at a speed that would allow for effective filming. In order to resolve this problem, the mouse was thrown hard against the wall in order to stun it. As it slowly recovered and moved along the wall, the camera was able to capture it. This bill brings to an end such cruel practices. Anyone wanting to use animals for entertainment will have to apply and be granted a license to do so. The bill came about as a result of the need to make it constitutionally compliant, in that judicial officers were performing administrative functions. The Portfolio Committee, working in tandem with the department, made sure that this impediment is removed. We went further to cover any other foreseeable obstacles, and we appropriately legislated for their circumvention. Once it becomes law, animals, whether they are used for security purposes by the police and private guards, or kept as pets, or in transit, they will be more protected than ever before. Although no regulatory impact assessment appears to have been done, this is of no serious consequence because the government will only be playing a regulatory role here, and therefore expenditure will be both foreseeable and limited to human resource provision. Through this bill, our country will be positioned as a world leader in the protection and welfare of performing animals. I thank you, Chair Lady.
Thank you. Honorable Carter.
Thank you, Chairperson. The preamble to our Constitution provides that government is based upon the will of the people. This very House recently debated the issue of participation and its importance in democracy. Yet, when it came to the Papa Bill, public participation were rubbished. Various detailed written submissions were made and submitted, but they were all ignored. Stakeholders met with the department and provided their inputs. None of their inputs have been captured. On the 4th of May, stakeholders travelled to Cape Town for public hearings scheduled for the 5th and the 6th of May. These public hearings were cancelled without notice. On the afternoon of the 11th of May, stakeholders were notified that the public hearings had been rescheduled to take place the following day, the 12th of May. We're talking about stakeholders living across South Africa and having to arrange their own transport. Stakeholders such as LATA, members were neither notified nor invited or got any notice that the public hearings were taking place the following day. How do we omit inviting the representatives of a very group the new bill seeks to regulate? we have to ask how practical are the provisions and prescripts of the Act. And I'm going to run through a couple quickly. Section 3F1C, for instance, contradicts the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority Bill. Section 3F2A and B2I is not implementable as it can change daily depending on the handler, the client's preference of a dog, the breed, the color, temperament, and environment. There also doesn't seem to be a simple way to add or remove an individual animal from a trainer's list. How practical can this be? Due to constant criminality, additional services are required at unspecified times, and immediate reaction or action must be taken. The proposed bill, as it is, requires a license prior to commencement of a service. Section 4, right of entry, A, contradicts amongst other, the Animals Protection Act 1962, paragraph 8, 1AD, and that with a fine of 20,000 rand. Section 4A, B, and C will result in key points such as, amongst others, even the addresses of MPs and cabinet members being advertised to all. At the time when any legislation is being developed or passed, the question should be, how does this legislation foster efficiency and effectiveness, growth and development? The Constitutional Court gave an extension and that magistrates could issue licenses for 2016 in order for the license officers to establish for 2017 licensing. So how different is this Papa debacle from the visa scandal? Honestly, I would say I'm out of time that we need to please take this bill back and let us do it properly. I thank you.
Barrelage, Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time in post-apartheid South Africa that animal welfare legislation is being changed. Many feel government could have used this opportunity to deal with major changes in the scientific understanding of animal welfare since 1935. But the Department of Agriculture, which drafted the law, has adopted a minimalist approach. The purpose of the Act, for example, is alluded to and key provisions refer to it, but it is never defined properly. The ACDP did not manage to participate in deliberations on this Act, but would like to have seen its purpose to protect the welfare of performing animals made clearer, and calls on the Department to consider further amendment in time. This is also very little guidance. There is also very little guidance in the legislation for new decision makers, the national licensing officers, when deciding whether or not to grant a license. The amendment as it stands provides for national licensing officers to be veterinarians or animal scientists, although the meaning of the term is in fact unclear. The Act also allows the licensing function to be delegated, but does not provide that any such decision maker has the relevant expertise. Without these provisions, the licensing function will fail to offer much protection for animals. There is presently no provision for any democratic participation in the process of granting licenses, and members of the public and organizations are of the opinion that their input regarding specific situations would allow decision makers a more informed decision. Other amendments that could be considered include the definition of animal, which as it stands excludes reptiles, and we know that welfare concerns arise in respect of them too. Aquatic animals, such as dolphins and orcas, are often used for entertainment, but the Act does not apply to them either. Right now there is a petition being signed regarding inhuman conditions under which battery hens producing eggs live in South Africa. This legislation was an opportunity to place South Africa as a world leader in the protection of the welfare of performing animals, but we seem to have missed the mark. The ACDP calls on the Department to consider further amendments resulting from the public participation process, but we will be supporting this Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Matekwan.
Thank you very much, House Chair. The bill addresses one aspect of animal welfare as it deals with performing animals. The House should be made aware that the Department of Agriculture, Forests and Fisheries has been urged by the Portfolio Committee to consolidate the work done towards developing a holistic animal welfare policy in response to the short-term and long-term animal welfare matters that have been raised during our deliberations. It is therefore important that the bill is not seen in isolation, but rather as part of the broader animal welfare picture. Much careful deliberations has gone into consideration in terms of how forthcoming animal welfare legislation will complement the amendments in the Papa Bill and vice versa. Through the deliberations of the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, Forest and Fisheries, during the processing of the Performing Animals Protection Amendment Bill, there were clarion calls from the members of the animal welfare community that the license application process should be democratized such that the database of the applications registry should be made accessible to the public. The Portfolio Committee has recommended in this regard that such a database be made available to any member of the public who may request it as well as through the departmental website for those with access to the internet. The Portfolio Committee has deliberated and took caution to the fact that there are municipal bylaws that may also seek to govern areas related to the use of animals in domestic residences. The provisions of the bill will not impede the implementation of bylaws or any other relevant environmental legislation. With regard to the Animal Protection Act, this needs to be read with the Papa Bill. Whilst this committee has not looked into the Animal Protection Act to determine whether it did provide the welfare of animals or not, the APA's intention is to protect animals, which could be inferred from the definition itself. On the National Licensing Officer, the matter has been dealt with, as it is an executive function, and the bill will give a mandate to the minister. With regards to appeals, it has to be noted that the responsibility would have been delegated to the National Licensing Officer. In addition, the minister, with respect to appeals, deal with this through the establishment of an appeal board to deal with the matter. The bill fits into our democratic culture of ensuring protection not only to the most vulnerable in society, but to politically manage the exploitative practices of those who seek to accumulate wealth in our practices, which will not be conducive to the democratic processes. I thank you.
Thank you. Mhlonishwa Nchaisa.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. It is good that all the acts should be looked into and amended, as it is the case with this Performing Animals Protection Act of 1935. Certain sections have been repealed and new definitions have been inserted. We therefore put this Performing Animals Protection Amendment Bill before this House for the purpose of adoption. This bill seeks to provide for the designation of national licensing officer and also makes application procedure for the license to exhibit and train performing animals or use of animals for safeguarding. The function of national licensing officer have been properly explained. The issuing of license and how appeals can be lodged if the licensing officer does not issue the required license to exhibit and train animals has been explained also. One would think that safeguarding dogs are not performing, but they are on duty or at work. However, more clarity has been made in that regard. The minister must designate a national licensing officer with relevant qualifications, either be an animal scientist or veterinarian. This means that licenses will be not just be granted, rather be granted, but a person with relevant skills will do the job. There's going to be thorough monitoring on the training of these animals so that cruelty to animals is prevented. What is good, that the animals will no longer be subjected to that type of training as it was the case before. Those applications, if they've been turned, then people are allowed now to appeal. The Act also provides for the right of entry by the police officer into any premises or place vehicles in which animals are maintained, kept, or confined for the purpose of exhibition or being trained or safeguarding. Should one obstruct the police officer from doing his or her job, should be fined or imprisoned for a period not exceeding 12 months. So AIC supports this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable Youngblood.
Dankie, agbare voorsitter. Agbare minister, hopelik het u deeglik kennis geneem van my agbare kollega Steyn se lys van verouderde wetgewing wat effektiewe vordering in die landbousektor kniehalter. Ek sonder hieronder die wetsontwerp op die optredes van diere, of in die algemene omgang bekend as die PAPA-wet, uit, wat op aandring van die Grondwethof minimale aanpassing ondergaan het. In sy uitspraak het die Hof onder meer 'n belangebotsing tussen die regbank en die uitvoerende gesag uitgewys en is daardie klousule deur die Hof ongrondwetlik verklaar. Die departement het met sy oogklap benadering om net die 2 klousules wat deur die Hof voorgeskryf is te verander, 'n goue geleentheid verpas om 'n algeheel verouderde stuk wetgewing te skrap en 'n nuwe wet te skryf. Mens sidder egter by die gedagte aan hoe lank 'n hele nuwe wetgewing sal neem as dit die regering amper 3 jaar gevat het om net die 2 klousules op versoek van die Grondwethof aangepas te kry. Hierdie geleentheid om 'n uitgediende wet te skrap was die eerste kans in post-apartheid Suid-Afrika vir die regering om werklik te bemoei met die welsyn van diere op alle vlakke en iets daadwerkliks te doen op die gebied van die beskerming van diere wat vir ander se vermaak optree. En wat doen ons? Ons vervang 'n woord hier, 'n klousule daar, ons vervang die woord landros met nasionale lisensieringsamptenaar of veearts en ons omskryf hond as 'n dier. Maar daar is in die proses 'n klomp ander geleenthede misgekyk. So byvoorbeeld, minister, word reptiele uitgesluit en dolfyne en orka-walvisse en sovoorts. Agbare minister, daar behoort oor PAPA in sy geheel herbesin te word. Dit gaan dood eenvoudig nie ver genoeg om die belange van diere in die breë te beskerm nie en daar is hopeloos te veel skuiwergate. Baie dankie.
Dankie, agbare lid. Agbare lid Mabe.
Thanks,
Honorable Chair, perhaps we must start with the Democratic Alliance and the EFF, who respect the court so much and are saying we must not respect the decision of the court and be in contempt. So it will be difficult.
Honorable Mabe, please take your seat. What are you raising on, Honorable Paul, sir?
Honourable House Chair, I just want to ask the Honourable Mabi a question as to what
Honourable Paul,
as to
sir.
what authority he's going to be, since he's never attended a committee discussing this issue. Boroto, you can't do that, man. I'm speaking. He's never attended.
No.
a committee
Honourable
to
member,
discuss
that's
this.
not a point of order. Please take your seat. Continue, Honourable Mabe.
We refuse to be in contempt of court. That is why we have had all necessary undertakings to make sure that this bill ultimately comes here and it is passed in the interest of those who are involved with performing animals. Molao wa o tshireletša diphoofolo tša tiragatšo ke e nngwe ya ntlha ye ileng ya išwa kgotlatshekelo ke ba SPCA. E bontšha gore a se mokgwa maleba gore magistrata e tshwantše e be yena a tšeang maikarabelo a o fana ka laesense ya diphoofolo tše tša ditiragatšo. Rena re le ba lekgotla la temo, dihlapi le mafoka re bone e le toka gore re tšwetše pele se kgotlatshekelo e se kgopetšeng. And accordingly, what we have done was to ensure that in the amendment bill we insert in there licensing authorities, which will now be responsible, divorced from the courts, for the allocation of these licenses for performing animals. We have also paid special attention on the issue of animal welfare. So those who are new to the committee might not know, because some of these things we started dealing with them the previous year. But to perhaps bring them up to speed, the matter of animal welfare is an issue that is receiving our attention. One of the things that we are emphasizing is that we did not only need to deal with the protection of performing animals, we should also deal with how those charged with the responsibility of handling these animals conduct themselves, so that these animals are not encroached. Maybe at a later stage we'll have to check whether we can effectively classify this as animal rights. Because unlike us, we have got the Bill of Rights. These animals cannot speak for themselves. It is expected from a caring government than this one, like this one of the ANC, to do legislations that can also safeguard these performing animals. So we are a caring government. We care for the people, we also care for the animals. That's why we have got laws that ensures that these performing animals are protected. But beyond that, when we look at the issue of animal welfare, one of the things that we must not forget is that our own people, we the African people, also use animals as part of certain cultural beliefs, to conduct rituals as well, to build our own proverbs and idioms. That's why in Sepedi we say, "Tau ja hloka seboka, di shitwa ke nare tloja." We use animals to emphasize unity. We also use animals to reflect the discontent of individuals when we say, "Khomu ka mo gobeng di wecha ke namane." And then we come back and say, "Pudi ja ja luocha di fete cha che dingwe." So animals have been quite important to build our own understanding as society. Maybe as part of this, even on indigenous knowledge systems, we use animals to do a number of things. For instance, we use sheep for rainmaking. We use goats to communicate with the ancestors. We in the Mabis, that's what we do. We use chickens. We use chickens for cleansing. Not Baisan, not these ones that you buy for 20 rand, indigenous chickens. These ones are specifically used for cleansing. So it is important that when we deal with the protection of animals and look broadly into their welfare, we also do not encroach into these cultural beliefs, because these things are enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic. So it is important that we all understand these things so that we do not blow them out of proportion. As it comes to consultation, the honorable member has said here we did not consult. Unfortunately, I tried to check on the attendance register. I have seen that there are dates where you have missed meetings. And in those days, we were meeting with stakeholders in the sector. So there's been wide consultation on this matter. I am sure those who are involved with performing animals are quite excited about the stand that the ANC-led government is taking on the matter. Rena re le ba lekgotla le legolo la ANC. Re nyaka netefatša gore le diphoofolo tše tša disorokisi le tšona di a tlhokomelwa le ba bapetši ba tšona le bona ba di tlhokomela ka tsela ya maleba. We are doing this because we do not want animals to die in the line of duty. That will be a sad day. That's why we are putting all of these things. But the more and more you come and attend committee meetings, you will get to understand that more is being done. So it is important that we do not conduct or carry ourselves like these performing animals. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Ra leboga mhlomphegi. Re tlo bitša mhlomphegi a tlo tswalela.
Ke a bolela, in response to the issues raised by Honorable Steyn, she knows and I know that all legislation within the realm of the department are being revised, and she knows that. Ukuzapha kule ndlu afika athethe ngathi le nto uyaqala ukuyibona uqamele ngesebe lenkawu. Inyani yokobana akazihoyanga izilwanyana uhambisa umthetho ngaphambili uthi loo nto ayikho kodwa uyayazi bikhona. Ndivume, again, I agree with those who said we need to do more. I agree with you, and we're going to do more to make sure that animals are protected. This measure was in conformity with the court judgment. And already those who sit in committees, which mistake never missed, knows very well that we're busy what she's raising here. So ngililisho akuba senze ipolitiki sibenza izilwanyana. Kumphathiswa ummeli okanye Honorable Paulson, I think ukuthi apha ukwenza imicimbi yesintu bobugqirha ndicinga baba mamela abamthume eParliament and bayamva into yobana akazikhathalelanga izimvo zakhe uqhube zakhe and ndiqinisekile ikomiti ahamba nayo ayihambisani naye ngoba iyayazi into yobana amasiko nezithethe akhathwa ngezilwanyana ungekho nqala nalunya kuloo nto. And we believe, therefore, that as the department, thanks to all those who have supported this bill, we'll work with you to ensure that where there are weaknesses, we strengthen. The welfare of animals can never find this expression except by a caring government. They may not be those who are voting for us, like the others would like to make sure that they are the best.
Honorable
But we care for them because we're a caring government, we're the ANC.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Order. That brings us to the end of the debate on the amendment bill. Are there any objections to the bill being read a second time? Yes. In light of the objection, I will put the question. Those in favor will say aye. Those against will say no. I think the ayes have it.
Chairperson, will you please note the objection of the DA? Thank you.
The objection of the DA will be recorded. Honorable Paulson.
Chairperson, also note the objection of the EFF.
The EFF objection will be recorded. Honorable Milder.
As well as the FF Plus, thank you.
The FF Plus objection will be recorded.
As well as for Congress of the People.
The COPE one will be. Thank you. Honorable
Chairperson, can you record the abstention of the IFP on this?
Abstention from the IFP to be recorded. Thank you very much. The Secretary will read the bill a second time.
Performing Animals Protection Amendment Bill.
Thank you very much. The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. I will now ask the Secretary to read the second order.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Telecommunications and Postal Services on first quarterly report on performance of Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services.
Thank you. Well read. Honorable Kubai to speak on the report, to introduce the report.
Thank you, House Chair. Firstly, I just want to indicate today we're celebrating the International Women's Day under the Planet 50-50 by 2030 Step Up for Gender Equality. I think it's important to give tribute to all women who fought selflessly to make the world that it is today a better place for all of us. Chairperson, the report that is before us, it's for the Portfolio Committee on Telecommunication and Postal Services, which dealt with the department and its entities and make recommendations that led to some of the issues already being resolved. We met with the department together with the entities to look at, firstly, around the issue of SAPO. At that time, South African Post Office Board had no, South African Post Office did not have a board, which today has a board. We also emphasized the importance of consequence management, especially with regards to the issues of non-compliance of legislation, but as well the issues of not following the procedures that needed to be put in place. We recommended again that the department, together with its entities, put in place mechanisms to be able to report and resolve issues that are raised by the Auditor General and together with the Portfolio Committee. We are starting to see those decisions. We are starting to see the turnaround around those issues. The other issue that we raised as the Portfolio Committee was concerns around the broadband infraco, which at that time had a lot of targets that they had put in place, which were unrealistic, and we realized that they will not be able to meet. We congratulated USASA in terms of their performance, because this is an entity at 2012 which had not performed well, and we are starting to see impact in terms of tight management systems that were there. Finally, the recommendations that we put in as the Portfolio Committee was to emphasize the importance of the department together with the entity to look at the Presidential Review Committee report on SOCs, because we felt that there is a need when they deal with their entity restructuring or the issue of rationalization of the entities, that they needed to follow what has already been recommended so that it's not a duplicate. So we put in the report for adoption by the House so that we can be able to emphasize the importance of the work of the committee, but as well ensure that what has been put through by the Auditor General entities together with the department are able to implement. Thank you very much, House Chairperson.
Thank you very much. The declarations. But you have to call them. Yeah, please. Can you sit and allow the process?
Chairperson, the DA would like to make a declaration. Thank you.
Allowed. 3 minutes, remember?
And the EFF would like to.
You will follow, ma'am.
Looking back today at the picture painted by the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services of its achievements for the first quarter of last year and its plan for the rest of the year, it's difficult to determine what has changed. In the past year, the department has been beset by turf wars, the settling of scores among the Directors Generals and the Deputy Directors General, and failing targets. After the collapse of the top echelons and several resignations, the Minister finally took action late last year to suspend the Director General and ask the Public Service Commission to investigate. Today, we only have one Deputy Director General still standing. The others resigned. The department really is one of the most dysfunctional departments in government, and it's going to be hard-pressed to improve on this report. At stake in all this turmoil is our flagship broadband rollout program, South Africa Connect, which has shown no noticeable traction in the past year. In the report before you today, it stated that the appointment of the lead agency for SA Connect, dubiously announced as Telkom by the President in last year's SONA, was delayed as due process was still being followed. During the past year, I have repeatedly asked questions about this process, and as recently as last week, again, the Minister sent a non-reply. The Minister has been unable to tell me what that process is, or exactly how the 700 million rand budgeted for SA Connect was to be spent. Is the process of selecting the lead agency being done in an open and transparent manner, as it is legally obliged to be? All the Minister says is that due process is being followed. Can the Minister explain exactly what is this due process that has been going on for a year? Apparently not, if his parliamentary responses are anything to go by. So one is left to assume that the process will not be transparent and therefore likely to be legally challenged, all of which further delays the delivery of fast internet services, particularly in rural areas. This will exacerbate the digital divide and further isolate poor South Africans, denying them opportunities offered by the knowledge economy. And this year's first-year quarterly report is likely to be a rerun of the current one before this House today. Thank you.
Thank you. EFF.
The EFF reject the adoption of this report of the Portfolio Committee on Telecommunications on first quarter performance on 2015. Like many other reports adopted in the House to simply be a self-generous approval, one has to ignore reality and provide alternative. And this is exactly what the ANC government continue to do by just rubber-stamping these reports. The Department of Telecommunications spent majority of 2015 first quarter dealing with the infighting between the minister and his own suspended DG. The department cannot perform its functions when the entire senior management team spend majority of the department time and resources fighting each other. The people who suffer the most, Chairperson, is ordinary people and workers who are left with exorbitant communication costs since the department is failing to execute its mandate. The communication is supposed to enhance and harness information flow to most rural areas, and this department, together with their counterparts who failed to meet broadcasting digital migration deadline. It is extremely difficult to even begin to take the committee's report, as it fails to put the seriousness of dysfunctionals, and the report are written as if everything is well. The EFF will only support adoption of the reports that are not misleading to the people. Hence, the EFF reject this misleading report. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. NFP.
Thank you, Honourable House Chair and honourable members of this House. The report tabled here today cannot mask the fact that the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services is in deep trouble. The damning report by the Public Protector, which exposed a flawed procurement process dating back to 2010, gives us insight into the state of decay at the Post Office. And the delays to roll out broadband and complete our digital migration are examples of how the department is failing. The problems that are bedeviling the postal and telecommunication sectors manifest at the state enterprise level. But the recent Public Services Commission report shows that incompetent senior officials are the primary contributor to the paralysis of the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services. The paralysis, Honourable Chairperson, lies at the heart of the poor performance of the postal services and telecommunications sectors in our country. The Portfolio Committee has also noted that the confusion experienced by state-owned entities within the department was a direct indication that officials were not doing their work. The NFP maintains that until such time as there are serious consequences for government officials, and in particular senior managers who fail in their duty, this problem of bad governance will continue. The National Freedom Party welcomes the recommendations of the Portfolio Committee on Telecommunications. In particular, We are encouraged by the recommendation that department should implement consequence management in respect of the performance of its staff. Honorable Chairperson, the reality is that without consequence management, you are not leading, you are creating chaos. This chaos is evident in the long list of recommendations made by the Portfolio Committee, and we express the sincere hope that the department will implement the recommendations of the committee to the letter. In conclusion, Chairperson, the National Freedom Party supports the PC report. Thank you.
Thank you. IFP.
Thank you very much, Honourable House Chairperson. The report highlights a variety of important issues and, of course, a lack of movement in some areas. Some of the achievements which must be noted and welcomed is the fact that the department has implemented and developed a cybersecurity awareness plan and media strategy. Education on cybercrime has become ever more important, considering that recent reports indicate that cybercrime affects up to a third of South African companies. Cybercriminals are launching a digital offensive in South Africa with attacks primarily focusing on phishing tactics. The report also tabled here today highlights progress in terms of the implementation of the turnaround strategy of the South African Post Office. And while the IFP supports the Post Office's latest turnaround strategy and its vision, which is being espoused by the new CEO, we again wish to highlight our concerns in this regard. We are of the view that the odds are firmly stacked against the Post Office. The Post Office is currently in financial ICU, and in a digital era, the postal services are largely redundant. And to make matters worse, the Post Office has lost a number of key clients. For example, a medical company contracted by medical aid schemes to distribute medicines to South Africans, even in far-flung areas, have taken their business away from the Post Office and given it to courier companies. This is but one example, but one can cite many more. So the question really to be answered is whether it's not too late to save the Post Office. And will this latest turnaround strategy not be yet another exercise in futility? Only time will tell. However, the IFP is of the opinion that government can no longer expect a taxpayer to continuously bail out the Post Office under such dire circumstances. That should be non-negotiable. And finally, the IFP would like to also express our grave concern with the slow or non-existent broadband rollout, especially in rural areas, which continues to hamper economic growth and excludes many South Africans from the economy. I thank you.
Thank you. ANC.
Thank you, Chairperson. The Collective International Communications Committee has been in one to deal with the challenges of the committee. And we want to applaud the DA for their consistency in attending meetings and also attending to challenges that we face on a daily basis in as far as the committee is concerned. The challenges have been partly attended to as indicated in the report. We acknowledge the findings of the public protector, and the department, together with the committee, commits to the seriousness, the serious corrective measures to the challenges raised. Concerns raised by other parties are also appreciated. However, it is important that we don't rely on media statements, but attend to the meetings and also make contributions to what we've seen, like we do oversight and other people do not even bother to come to oversight, but they have to come and stand here and grandstand. But we do appreciate their concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, I will now recognize the acting chief whip of the majority party.
Honorable House Chairperson, I move that the report be adopted.
The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections? No objections. Agreed to. I'll ask the secretary to read the third order.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Telecommunications and Postal Services on oversight visit to Limpopo.
Honorable Kubai to introduce the report.
Thank you, House Chairperson. I think let me highlight that this report comes after the Portfolio Committee has done an oversight visit to Limpopo. We visited firstly the Malamulele area in Minga village. We went to Chikundu village. where we visited a school in Shikundu Secondary School to oversee part of the work that was done as 2010 connectivity legacy project. We went as well to visit Giani Nursing College, Waterberg Teachers Center. We visited in terms of South African Post Office, Malamulele Post Office, Nongamani Post Office, Bakersford Post Office, Drigop Post Office. You'd note, honorable members, that our visit was mainly in the deep rural areas to ensure that connectivity does not happen only in urban areas, but as well rural communities do get the benefit of connectivity. Again, we went to Hariba where there's a project. We also interacted with Hankwana tribal community. I need to highlight that in terms of the visits that we have done, we went to Mutali local municipality where USASA connected the local municipality which was connecting the local municipality, the tribal houses in the communities, the municipality, the schools there. And what we saw, and we could receive as well as a feedback from the community, that the connectivity has happened as per the promise of USASA. We went to Giani College, Nursing College, which was very good because we could see how learners or the nursing students, how they were taught using technology and visual labs that were happening, which we think these are part of the future generations that we are building. At Waterberg Teacher Center, we were seeing part of the work that is being done in partnership together with the Department of Education, Basic Education, and Vodacom, which they were doing the work of connecting the teacher center as part of empowering the teachers. We went to SAPO. There were challenges with SAPO, I must say, that part of what we met as we were going, some of the workers were not paid, and there were quite issues that we had raised as the committee, and SAPO management were able to give us feedback even while we were on site. One of the issues I must highlight within our communities, and maybe appeal from our side as the portfolio committee, when we went to Hariba, we found that a project that was meant to continue by Centec was stopped by communities. Their protest had nothing to do with Centec. This is part of the sites that were connected for digital needed to be connected, established and connected for digital migration, but were stopped because community was unhappy about something else that related to the roads. When we interacted with the community, the project was allowed to proceed. But unfortunately, last week again, we got a report that they are stopping the project and they were threatening to hold hostage the workers of Centec. And this is what we are appealing to our communities, that in order to express their frustration and their happiness about something, they don't need to destroy what is important, because that will continue to impact on their ability to be able to receive and make calls. It will impact on their ability to be able to watch TV, because these are the platforms. The work that is done by Centec allows for these facilities to be done. So that is part of the problem. But what is emphasized as well in the report is the importance of ensuring that rural communities, especially because we feel that the plight of women and children will be ignored if we do not ensure that connectivity in rural communities happen. Because we continue, if we do not do those things, inequality will be perpetuated through infrastructure of ICT, where you find urban areas continue to benefit, have infrastructure such as LTE, whereas rural communities do not even have an access or an opportunity to be able to make a call. So our report emphasizes the importance of putting rural communities to the front of our planning as government, and we urge the Department of Telecommunication and Postal Services to ensure that planning happens in such a way that it addresses the inequalities. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honorable Deputy Chief
Chairperson,
Whip.
the DA
Yes.
would like to make a declaration, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mackenzie.
Thank you, House Chair. To be frank, the Post Office really needs to push the envelope on service delivery, but we won't talk about that today. What we will talk about is access to, or lack of access to, telecommunications and the internet, which in our view is the single biggest obstacle to reducing the inequality that exists in our country today. The digital divide, meaning the ability of people to access the internet and fast and reliable telecommunications, is not, as many of us, especially on this side of the House, would have us believe, along racial lines. Rather, this inequality is prevalent mostly in rural areas and the divide that exists between the urban areas and the rural areas, where the future of so many of our children are being stolen from them simply because they do not have the same access to the digital world and the digital economy that their urban counterparts do. During the Portfolio Committee's visit to Limpopo, we found schools with computers and screens that were unconnected, with keyboards thrown into a corner and gathering dust. The Intapani Primary School that was connected, or partially connected, by Centec, and the Kakundu Secondary School that was a beneficiary of a Telkom World Cup 2010 legacy project, whose so-called network had a download speed of just 40 kilobits per second. That means that if I'd started to download a News 24 main page just to check one news article, I'd still be sitting there now waiting for that page to load. And this school is listed as successfully connected to the internet and therefore ready for a digital learning experience. Shame. Contrast this with the high standards of connectivity and workable ICT solutions shown at the Guyani Nursing College, connected by MTN, and the Waterberg Teacher Center, connected by Vodacom. Government needs to act as a facilitator and give the opportunity to companies that have shown they have the capability and the capacity to deliver fast, robust, and effective solutions, and that can actually do the work, and allow them, those companies, to connect our people today, and today, before another year is wasted and another child's future is lost. The DA supports this report. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Honorable Mukause.
Thank you, House Chair. The EFF rejects the adoption of the oversight report by the Portfolio Committee to Limpopo. There is a clear attempt by the ANC to mislead people of South Africa by adopting reports in this House that fail to capture the reality many ordinary people face, with weak recommendation, and it becomes self-appraisal exercise. Our people are compromised, and that's the reality. Communities have no radio station, no television. If there's a radio station, you find out it's not funded. No cellular phone, post offices are failing to pay staff members, and children do not have computers, let alone access to internet. By failing to extend something as basic as a radio signal, the ANC government is playing an active role to ensure that the people of Limpopo province remain marginalized and passive participants in the economy of the province and of this country. By failing to ensure that post offices are fully staffed and functioning, the ANC government is intentionally alienating the Limpopo province. The report before the House failed to appreciate the magnitude of the impact of the poor telecommunications and postal services. To say compromised, it's a mild way to put it. Otherwise, such a crucial aspect of Parliament mandate is reduced to a mere holiday trip around the country by members of Parliament of the African National Congress who enjoy just cruising. The EFF is not going to be party to general self-appraising report. We therefore reject the report before the House. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Shaikiman.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Members of the Honorable House, the report of the Portfolio Committee tabled today is very comprehensive, and it's evident that the oversight visit was conducted with great diligence. It is also evident that the Portfolio Committee had deliberated in great depth on the challenges encountered and solutions to offer. The National Freedom Party fully supports the findings of the Portfolio Committee, and we are encouraged by the long list of recommendations contained in this report. Honorable Chairperson, it is common knowledge that the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services is one of the worst performing departments in government, which is a pity because their mandate is of great importance to South Africa, both for its economy and its people. It is therefore not surprising that the problems and challenges faced by the Department of National Level are also reflected and endemic in its lower provincial and regional offices too. Looking at the comprehensive list of overall recommendations the Portfolio Committee has made, the National Freedom Party believes that the department could well turn the tide in Limpopo if these recommendations are followed through and with great haste. In particular, we would like to see swift action on the recommendations pertaining to the late payment and non-payment of salaries. We find it unacceptable that a state-owned entity, such as the South African Post Office, could default on the payment of salaries when funds have been budgeted for and allocated in advance. This is untenable and should never happen in any government department. We have said it before and we say it again, Honourable Chairperson, until such time as there are serious consequences for government officials and in particular senior managers who fail in their duty, this problem of bad governance will continue. Many of the challenges faced by the department stem from the lack of adequate and efficient management, and until this core problem is resolved, the problems at the department will persist. In conclusion, the National Freedom Party supports this report.
Thank you, ANC.
Thank you, Chairperson. The situation in rural areas is indeed a point of concern. As we raise concerns of poor service delivery, let us be considerate of the challenges of infrastructure, which is not easily implemented like in urban areas. However, there is progress in other areas whereby Centec has connected in some schools. We also want to acknowledge efforts made by the chiefs in providing land to ensure there is infrastructure. Challenges of the post office have never been a secret. They have been in the public space, and the situation in rural areas has been a priority in the committee and, of course, in government. Complaints have been raised. Now is the time for us to come with solutions. EFF has never been there when needed, and their obsession with negative attitude is a sickness which is known. If there's a cruise, surely it is the EFF which was cruising at the expense
Honourable
of the taxpayers'
Member,
money.
please take your seat. What are you rising on, Honourable Member?
House Chair, the EFF is always on the ground with its people.
Honourable-
We know the challenges facing our people. We don't have to waste
Honourable
government
Member,
money and cruise around the country.
Honourable Member, that's a statement and not a point of order. Continue, Honourable Member.
The negative attitude is a sickness which is known. If there is a cruise, surely it is the EFF which was cruising at the expense of the taxpayers' money. Constructive criticism is welcome, but prophets of doom can only be attended to by the Department of Health. We do not have that skill. And people don't attend meetings like we say, but they come and grandstand. It's unfortunate that we cannot have control over the media. There'll always be here and there'll always be problems whenever they're in the House. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the acting chief whip of the majority party.
Honorable House Chairperson, I move that the report be adopted.
The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections?
Please note the objection of the EFF.
The EFF objection will be recorded. So the report is agreed to except for the objection of the EFF. Thank you. I will now ask the Secretary to read the fourth order.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Sport and Recreation on implementation of National Sport and Recreation Plan in Eastern Cape and Gauteng.
We'll now ask Honorable Ralogoma to introduce the report.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The report was tabled at the ATC of the 26th January 2016. As you know, the oversight trip was done last year, 21st to the 24th July. The purpose really was to assess the use of the grant allocated to the provinces in terms of the Division of Revenue Act for the implementation of sport and recreation programs for providing sporting opportunities to communities, assess whether provincial plans are aligned to the Sport and Recreation South Africa mandate of implementing the National Sport and Recreation Plan vis-à-vis the provincial outcomes, assess the impact of facilities built for sport and recreation through the assistance of National Lottery and Sport Trust, as well as the usage of MIC funding, monitor the implementation of sport-focused schools model in assisting talented athletes to achieve their potential. The attendance was quite good. We went to Eastern Cape and we met with the sport department there. We also went to Gauteng. We met with the sport department there, as well as the So, in the Eastern Cape, the provincial department National Sport Recreation Plan related plans for 2014 to 2019 comprised school sport, active recreation programs and campaigns, academies of sport, club development, support to sport councils and federations, sport tourism, international relations. The department presented a briefing on programs related to sport development, recreation, school sport, and the mass participation conditional grant. South African Local Government Association made input on the utilization of MIC funding in Eastern Cape. We also met with boxing promoters in Eastern Cape to just highlight the key findings from our visit. It seemed as if the provincial department's program for the 2015-2016 financial year were saturated around events linked to commemorative dates. It was not clear whether the provincial department had signed a memorandum of understanding with regard to the MIC allocation. In Eastern Cape, the mecca of boxing, there are two promoters associations, and the minister is currently dealing with that challenge. The concerns raised by the promoters have potential to delay the development of boxing in the province if they cannot be resolved. The Nelson Mandela municipality does not give the municipal sport department the 15% reinforced MIG funding. The linkages between overall projects and the impact it has on communities was not readily apparent. So these were, in the main, findings that were negative. There were also good positives, but because we want to put more pressure on the department, we made specific recommendations to the minister, which are detailed in terms of the shortcomings, and they are contained on the ATC of the 26th January 2016. With that, we are presenting this report for consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Member. Thank you, Lord Member. Declaration. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
They'll give you time.
Thank you. To cut to the chase, we support the report. However, there were very serious findings that we found there which I'll highlight. One of those is the state of boxing in that province. And at the root of that is just poor leadership, both from the provincial government and the fact that there are two units of boxing promoters whose divisions have been exacerbated by how their differences have been mishandled, either through their relationship with the provincial government or the supposed intervention from the minister. And it was very clear, even in that discussion, that those promoters that are seen to be aligned to the provincial government or have particular relationships with certain individuals in the provincial government, even in terms of funding for developmental boxing activities, that funding gets skewed in that direction. But also linked to that is the fact that the provincial government, in the form of the Department of Sports and Recreation, could not account for its clear breakdown of spending across all sporting federations, and particularly with regard to boxing. Because just to refresh the memories of some members of the committee, the Department of Sports and Recreation in the Eastern Cape was part of the funders of the Premier Boxing League, in which 8 million was contributed to host this provincial boxing championship led by a promoter called Dixing Lula, in which boxers were promised the cash prize of 1 million rands. To this day, the actual winner of that championship, Ndongeni Nomeva, who's known as Nomeva in the Eastern Cape, I'm sure the chairperson of the committee will know about him, has yet to be paid. But subsequent to that is the reality that when you go further into the lower forms of government, particularly local government, spending on sports facilities, either in the form of construction of new facilities or maintenance, gets either shifted across because there is not sufficient oversight on those. And this is where, as the National Portfolio Committee on Sports and Recreation, our interventions will always be belated, because by the time that we get to grips with these issues, the damage has already been done. And this was more evident in Gauteng, because we had some members of the Provincial Portfolio Committee on Sports and Recreation, but when those issues were brought to the front, it was all of a surprise to them. So the issue of oversight, as much as we can do our role as the portfolio committee, but unless it's done across all legislatures and even in municipalities, will continue to cheat youngsters of the opportunity to play in decent sporting facilities, because to some government and to some administrators, it is not seen as a core service delivery issue. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honourable Member.
Motlatsa Speaker Eric Otamishi ka ntlong kgolo. Re le EFF re amogela report e mabakeng a latelago. E be ke le gona go la Eastern Cape le go la Gauteng. Ke bone ka mahlo gore batho ba baso, batho ba sokolang a ba hlokomele ga e tla tabeng ya sports. Ditšhelete kwa Eastern Cape di fiwa dikolo tša bo Sankhurane, bo Daily College. Ge le tša ba sokolago a di hwetše selo. Ke ka tsela eo mmušo wa lehono o tlaišang batho ba sokolago. Ga gona tirišano magareng ga setšhaba le mmušo kwa Eastern Cape. Go tšweletše di-clubs tše le gore ga di tsebe le gore go diragang. Go na le IDP e le gore even di-stakeholders ga di tsebe ka ga yone. Ke ka lebaka leo di-clubs ja go boša mmušo wa province ka go latola gore lena a le re thuše ka selo. Ka kwa go la Gauteng re hoditše le gore ba mmušo ga ba dire oversight, ba mmušo wa province ga ba dire oversight, ba letela national parliament e tla tlo ba direla mošomo. That's why ga re fihla kwa dikolong e ba bona ba boditšang question instead of e be bona ba re addressang gore go diragang on the ground. A ba tsebe selo le gore go diragang on the ground. So ke ka lebaka le le gore kwa Rosina Sejubane ba mmušo ba hlolegile go araba dipotšišo tše le gore the national parliament be ba boditša tšona ka lebaka la gore be lela mathomo ba e kopanya le ba di-clubs ko dikolong. Ge le baraloki ba tša matswele le go boxing ka Eastern Cape ba mo mathateng ka baka la gore ba bolaišwa tlala di-promoters di dividile ka magamabedi go na le di-promoters tše e le gore ke bo sankhurane ke bagwera ba bo bossman ka mmušong and go na le promoters tše e le gore di neglectiwe di lahlilwe a di kry-e selo seo ke se bontšha mmušo wa mašaedi mmušo wa go se rate setšhaba mmušo wa go fa bosankhurane tšhelete ba tlogele batho ba baso re re go minister mbalula di išantate ditšhelete a di šomele setšhaba ditšhelete a di tlogele go ya go bosankhurane setšhaba ke sona se go boutetšego ka mabaka a gore re le EFF ra e kgothola ripote a re amogela.
Remember? Honorable House Deputy Speaker, the IFP do support the report of the committee, but there are still many schools without adequate grant funding and sport program facilities. Schools such as Katlehong High School in Katlehong and Ulwazi High School in Togoza, which both still have inadequate sporting ground, which places learners at these schools at a great disadvantage when it comes to sport development. When I last visited Katlehong High School in January 2016, the school principal, Ms. Ngwenya, requested my interventions. With the Department of Sport and Recreation, I duly sent correspondence to the Minister of Sport on the 26th of January 2016. To date, I have still not even had the courtesy of any acknowledgement of receipt, let alone a respond. In this, an example of how the Minister views sport development in our schools. In schools in rural areas and townships are hardest hit with little or no sporting facilities. These schools should be top of the list of our agenda, Minister. Why this is not so? The Joe Maron Boxing Club in Tema, Gauteng, which is home to some of the finest young boxing talent in South Africa, is still without proper equipment. This club has tried on numerous occasions to get assistance from the Minister. It always fails on deaf ears. Why does the Minister not respond to community issues such as this? Does he not care, or is his office just incompetent? Either may be need an urgent change in the sport minister is the sport development is suffering. Uma sifuna ukuthi kuqhubeke kahle ezikoleni noma mhlawumbe sikwazi uku-implementa i-sporting code ngolwesithathu noma iy'ngane zethu zikwazi ukuthi zibe nama-sporting code zonke iy'kole sicela ukuthi uminister ku-implementwe ipolicy ekhombisa ukuthi iy'kole iyakwazi ukuthi inakekele nokuphila kwey'ngane ey'koleni zethu. Ngiyathokoza.
Thank you, Chair. The Eastern Cape is still experiencing lots of ongoing serious disparities insofar as the availability of sports facilities is concerned. However, Dale College in King Williamstown must be commended for hosting 18 local schools for training. But the dependency syndrome results in those scholars not making full use of the facility as they need transportation to get there. There are serious ongoing problems in boxing down there. Previous speakers have alluded to this. It was alleged that, that one group of promoters get support from government on the basis that they have got strong political connections, and that one, the other one which doesn't have those connections is starving, and so do their boxers. Still, there's no maximum benefit from the MIG. Where it is utilized, it would have helped to alleviate the shortage of sports facilities. There is no meaningful relationship between the Provincial Department of Sport and SALGA, and this inhibits progress in sports development. Overall, there is still a lot to be done to advance the cause of sport, especially for players of color. Critical areas are these. administration, whether it's in rugby, whether it's in soccer, whether it is in any other sport, administration remains a challenge to a whole lot of sporting bodies. It's particularly the case when it comes to classes of people that are, to a large extent, dependent on government support. Conflicts. Conflict management remains a critical factor that inhibits the development of sport. This is across the board. Facilities, lots of institutions, lots of codes rather, lack facilities, and those that already have them, they need capital in order to be able to maintain them because people are so poor, there is no gate money to help them. Lastly, the Department of Basic Education is supposed to be working in tandem with the sports department, but that marriage could never be consumed. The regular absence of the minister from the portfolio committee does not help us as MPs to solve the political problems that surround sport. This is an ongoing concern, and we wish his colleagues could talk him into getting used to going to the portfolio committee. He is there only on invitation, and there are political problems that inhibit the development of sport in our country, but he's having a leisure time elsewhere. We support the report.
Yes, Honourable Member, NFP.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker and honourable members. The NFP welcomes the Portfolio Committee's report tabled here today and support the recommendations contained therein. Of particular significance to us are the many recommendations which urge the Department of Sports and Recreation to cooperate with the other government departments, municipalities, schools, and organizations. The NFP has on several occasions called for greater and visible cooperation between the department and schools. When we travel in rural areas past schools, it is heartbreaking to see children playing sport on any piece of level land they can find. There are very little visible signs of infrastructure development for sporting facilities at schools. And community sport facilities do not seem to feature high on the list of priorities for many of our municipalities. We believe, Honourable Deputy Speaker, that sport is one avenue open to youth where they can express their skills, dreams, and aspirations in a healthy and wholesome way. Sport has the potential to be a buffer for our youth against social ills such as drugs and alcohol abuse. Sport, furthermore, has the potential to unite communities and foster a sense of unity. We need to see sport as a resource for social cohesion. Cooperation between the Department of Sport and Recreation and other government departments, municipalities, and schools will go a long way in creating a climate where our sporting codes can be developed, nurtured, and harnessed for the benefit of society. But in itself, it is not the answer. We also need to put in place mechanisms to follow up on sports development initiatives to ensure that government is indeed doing its job. The NFP believes that effective monitoring and evaluation mechanism for sport development initiative will go a long way in addressing the concerns expressed by the Portfolio Committee in this report, and sincerely hopes that the Department of Sports and Recreation will implement the recommendation content in the report tabled here today with the due haste it deserves. Other than that, the NFP will support the report. I thank you.
Remember, Honourable Dulani.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Honourable members, in the ATC is a true reflection of what we've seen in these two provinces. may I confess that the Gauteng was the best with some few challenges when we're there. With the Eastern Cape problem, it's a problem that as the committee we did tabled back to the minister. What surprises us, we were doing an oversight because of the problem which are national of the boxing South Africa. But when we get there, to our surprise, we got two different boxing promoters without the boxings themselves. And as I'm standing here, I cannot confirm saying that what they've told us, it was a true reflection of what is happening in the Eastern Cape in boxing promoters, because they were having two sides that as a committee, we've noticed that when we were there, we wanted to hear the problems of the boxers, but they did come with their own problems as promoters. And that's what I cannot say, that those accusations and allegations they were putting to us, they are true reflection of the truth. We have said they must write it down to the committee, because when we were there, we were saying that how are we going to respond on allegations? And we decided as a committee saying that, please, what we are saying here, both of you write down in order that we must have written information. As from that day until today, there are no written representation. But when we were there, they were very harsh and they were hot. We even asked, if we are here to complain about your good selves, what about the boxers? Honorable, our Minister of Copter, the MIG in all provinces, except two provinces, which is Western Cape and Free State, is not used accordingly. We cannot achieve what we're supposed to achieve as this Department of Sport and Recreation, because the MIG is misdirected. And until that, we'll be seeing rural areas benefiting on what is in these 21 years down the line of the transformation of sport. Will help you to assist us on the MIG fund.
Honourable members, the motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections? No objections. Agreed to.
The objection of the EFF must be noted.
Okay. That will be noted. Okay. Honourable members, the next item is the debate on a matter of public importance in terms of Rule 103. In the name of Dr. P.W.A. Mulder, on the increasing racial tension and conflict in South Africa, especially in universities and its detrimental effect on the country's development. I now recognize Honorable P.W.A. Mulder.
Deputy Speaker, in South Africa there is currently a serious debate about racism. We here are the chosen representatives of the people. We have to provide leadership. To date, there hasn't been a debate about this issue in Parliament. That's why I asked this specific debate. So we disagree about many issues. That's why we sit here divided into different political parties. The question is, do we differ in our condemnation of racism? I believe that in debates like these, leaders have to set the example. Leaders on all sides. Leaders determine the tone of such debates. In the SONA debate, I said, also as a message to my supporters, racism is a very serious issue that must be condemned unconditionally. Racism from the side of white people All black people carries the germ that could destroy South Africa and all human relations. So I then referred to the T-shirt at UCT with "Kill All Whites" written on it. I believe the President would use the opportunity to also condemn it. My big disappointment was that he didn't react to it. So I'm prepared to state that Presidents Mandela, Mbeki and Motlanthe would have condemned it. The question is, where does this student protest come from? So in the past decade, government has given less money to universities every year and study fees were ever increasing. The Feast Must Fall protest campaign was a reaction to this. It was a broad protest across language and color barriers. So the current protests are different. The current protests are largely artificial. On every campus, there's a small number of activists, 4 or 5, who are calculating, try and start up protests. They are not supported by the thousands of students, as was the case with the Feast Must Fall, but only by a couple of hundred. This is an artificial attempt of certain political powers and the EFF to create a revolutionary climate. The artificial nature is clear from the fact that at every campus, a grievance is sought. At UCT, it's residences. At UWC, contract workers. At University of Pretoria, Afrikaans. When there wasn't a problem at Mahikeng with whites or Afrikaans, the Student Council became the grievance to burn buildings. Mr. Gordon can do his best to repair foreign interest trust, but if photos of burning university buildings appear abroad, it draws a line through these attempts. So Section 17 of the Constitution, and I quote it, says, "Everyone has the right, peacefully and unarmed, to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions." Sir, but there's no right to violence or to destroy. Section 16 guarantees freedom of expression, but then states that this right does not extend to incitement of imminent violence or advocacy to hatred that is based on race and that constitutes incitement to cause harm. Isn't this precisely what we have seen in recent times? Isn't this what the Kill All Whites T-shirt is trying to do? The majority of students want to study. Is it reasonable that a small group of activists is preventing them from studying as at Soshanguve? Campus rectors and government shouldn't hesitate to act against these students if their protests go over into violence, if they destroy property or infringe on the rights of other students. It's against the Constitution and the only way in which to address this problem. Sir, I said leaders determine the tone of such debates and I criticized the ANC. But this weekend, the Honourable Bladen Semandi proved me wrong. According to the Sunday Times, he said, these anti-white sentiments from students could lead to racial conflict. The students' approach was doing more harm than good to the struggle for non-racialism. We want to build a non-racial society. We must confront racist and racism, but we must be above them. Sir, for once I agree with the Honourable Minister. The Institute for Race Relations found an opinion poll on race that 85% of all South Africans agree that different races, the race groups need each other to make a success of South Africa. The majority of South Africans are good people who don't want conflict or racial tensions. Are we, as leaders in this assembly, portraying a unanimous view on racism to the outside, or do we differ in our condemnation of racism? Sir, be personal. My grandson, Peter, is exactly 1 week old today. He will be 50 years old in 2066. What will South Africa look like then? A country of violence, racism, and civil war, or a country that is a model for the world of how different groups could cooperate and afford everyone a place in the sun? What we do here today already starts to determine that future. I thank you.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, in leading the fight for non-racialism, the late president of the African National Congress, Comrade Oliver Tambo, warned us that racism bedevils human relations, brutalizes entire peoples, destroys persons, wasps, thought processes, and injects into human society a foul air of tension,
mutual antagonism and hatred. He said, and I quote, "When subjected to institutionalized racism, victims often internalizes the racism of the perpetrator. This involves turning in on oneself, blaming oneself, holding the perpetrator in high esteem, and regarding the system of racial oppression as natural," close quote. The late President O.R. Tambo had cautioned that the consequences of internalized racism are often manifest in the low self-esteem and self-loathing, which can lead to high levels of abuse of the most vulnerable within the oppressed group, such as women and children, and general prevalence of inward-directed violence. Honorable Speaker, unlike those of our compatriots who had benefited from or embraced racism, the overwhelming majority of South Africans who were victimized by the brutal system of segregation and apartheid have always rejected racism. We reject racism because it demeans and dehumanizes both victim and practitioner, locking them into the vile relationship of master race and counterman, superior and underling, each with his position defined by race. As we have seen in the recent weeks, the resurgence of the racism, including opposition to revised language policies at Stellenbosch, Pretoria, and Free State universities, supported by the descendants of beneficiaries of racist apartheid policies, the foul air of tension, mutual antagonism, and hatred at our institutions of higher learning has its origin from a longing for pigmentocracy, social, economic, and cultural dominance that characterize the African nationalism. Reactionary formations like the Freedom Front, of which one of the leaders was speaking earlier, and its right-wing partners, the AfriForum, are fueling the foul air of tension, mutual antagonism, and hatred because they are opposed to transformation of higher education and the shaping of democratic multilingual language policies and practices that reflect the aspiration of our Constitution. We are nonetheless encouraged that universities, which were enclaves of Afrikaner nationalism, seems eager to adopt progressive language policies. Our young people are increasingly rejecting racial hatred and the indoctrination of right-wing youth camps in the midst of racial chaos. We have seen them reach out to one another and holding hands, determined to overcome forces of hatred and those opposed to transformation. They do not need the Mulder brothers to distort the non-racial policies of the ANC because they understand what late world icon and former President Nelson Mandela meant when he said, and I quote, "During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and a free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die," close quote. Honorable Speaker, the preamble of our Constitution recognizes the historical obligation to redress and to correct the wrongs of the past and to affirm the historically disadvantaged. That includes the redress of the skewed economic ownership and land disposition. It acknowledges that we cannot achieve unity and social cohesion without reducing the gaps of inequality, unemployment, and poverty between rich and poor, black and white, women and men, city and country. At the center of the challenges that we are facing in this country are issues of inequality. And if we continue to disregard this important aspect, we will always miss the mark. So if people are dispossessed, they will raise their issues, and indeed those who have benefited will always defend that which they have. Without unity, the nation cannot hope to correct the wrongs of the past. Without correcting the wrongs of the past, unity will be superficial. Sadly, not all of us in this august house support the urgent need to reduce inequality of opportunity, redress and enabling sharing of common space. We need to awaken to the populace to speak when things go wrong and to be active in their own development. Over and above promoting the knowledge of the Constitution and fostering the values it espouses, we as the ANC wish to reiterate our call for strengthening of laws that protect and promote human dignity and equality by criminalizing racism. We call for the establishment of a national register for racist offenders. As part of tightening the legislation with racism, we will ensure that the racists are blacklisted. Making the register also available or accessible to embassies will assist them with the screening of visa application as well as work permits to keep racists from their countries. These racists must only remain here in South Africa because we have them. We have to manage them such that when they are fine, we can then allow them to be exposed to the world. The recent banning of Mr. Deval, a trainer employed by Capital Outsourcing Group, a South African-based company, for alleged ill-treating and racist towards Mozambican workers in Maputo, suggests that we urgently need the register to protect our country from those who have a potential to dent our image, to misrepresent us, both in the continent and abroad. Through the register, and I can hear that those that are against are just seated on my left-hand side. Through the register, we will guarantee that those who share the racist prejudice with Penny Sparrow, Garrett Cliff, Chris Hart, including the 3 Cape Town Table View youngsters that brutally assaulted Sonwabile Jakuja and left him to die, those posting racist comments on Afrofroma Facebook page are not embarrassing us elsewhere. Criminalization of racism will also rid this House of other public institutions and other public institutions of those found guilty of hate speech, like the DA's Diana Cola Barnett, Councillor Chris Roberts, and this must also include those that were exposing themselves and indeed involved in racial slur earlier on in this debate. Victims of racism like Elna Sikwane, who used to be a member of the DA, remember? And he used to pick up your leader from a Gautrain station. That lady who suffered humiliation when she was referred to by K-word and BEE trash by your member, your candidate for Steve Tshwete Municipal Council, Bernardi, Honorable Bernardi Shop, and he was unable to protect her, and yourselves have not been able to protect that lady. Those people need to be protected by this law, because we cannot afford a situation where perpetrators have to work hard to have them protected. We agree wholly with Standard Bank CEO Sim Chabalala that open and subtle racism hurts its victims terribly. It weakens the fabric of society, it poisons politics, it erodes the trust and optimism on which economic growth depends. As we said, our history has taught us that racism can lead directly to systematic cruelty and appalling violence. We welcome this assertion that transformation is not a choice. Indeed, all of us have a legal and moral duty to work hard to promote the transformation and enter a new phase of open and serious dialogue about race and racism in our country. We challenge business, the business sector, to demonstrate its commitment to transformation by the aspirations, values expressed in our Constitution, by the legal force of its equality clause, and in terms of precisely detailing legislation, including broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act, the Employment Equity Act, and the Labor Relations Act. As peace-loving South Africans, we have a responsibility to join hands across our many divides to build a nation united in its diversity. We recognize and appreciate the role of every South African in realizing our aspiration of a common nationhood and call on all sectors of our society to rally behind a vision of building a truly South African society that is enshrined in the Freedom Charter, a South Africa that belongs to all who live in it. We should remain united in our diversity and committed to the ongoing transformation based on the ideals that so many that had come before us laid their lives for. And as a people, we must reverse and reject racist organization and apologists of racism. Seated here on my left. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Bozoli.
Thank you, Chair. Individual and group expressions of racial and other forms of hatred are repellent and must be condemned. But they are symptoms of other things rather than causes in themselves. In the case of ongoing conflict in universities, we need to ask, symptomatic of what? The answer is this. Not only is our society in a terrible economic state, with over 8 million unemployed, 17 million living on state grants, and a 1% growth rate, not only is our state in the process of decay and half captured by an emerging dictatorship, but on top of that, our universities are paying the price for 20 years of financial neglect by government. Of all the many indicators proving this, the most important is this. While government repeatedly congratulates itself that student numbers have more than doubled in the past 20 years, from 400,000 to 1 million, the real amount universities have received from the state per student head has dramatically fallen by 25%, from 20,000 per annum to 15,000 per annum. We have steadily spent less every year on the costs of teaching our students and providing them with the learning materials and environments they need. Universities had to find the missing funds somewhere. Some have obtained grants from foundations and other private sources, but this does not pay for core costs. And will private funders give money to places where buildings are being burnt and feces thrown? Others have little chance of raising substantial private money. Either way, increasing fees has been the only option. At the same time, the majority of the 600,000 new students entering the system have come from poor backgrounds, victims of the economic disaster, which is the ANC government in the 21st century. NSFAS has proved unequal to the task of supporting them. So, the unstoppable force of increasing numbers of poor students has met the immovable object of the costs of running a university. Unsurprisingly, as a result, our universities have been subjected to massive, unremitting protests across every province. There has been violence, arson, vandalism, bullying, the prevention of learning, and probably many other things we don't know about. All our latent fears and historical resentments come to the fore when our world is threatened. It is not unexpected that out of this cauldron of anger and resentment, racial hatred has emerged. Now, what did the ANC think would happen? That the 600,000 new students would find money from a magical place somewhere, like the president has found to build his house? That the universities would miraculously be able to run their campuses on ever-shrinking budgets and keep their fees low? It is outrageous that the current scenario of virtual campus war appears not to have been predicted by government, in spite of warnings from various sources. The protests today have two roots. They are the middle-class students of all races who have decided to
Order,
adopt
members.
US-style
You can't be screaming
postmodern
across the
identity
House. You're out of
politics.
order.
Roads must fall is the outcome of this. Then there are those who pretend to represent the poor, black students, but instead of doing so, have hijacked legitimate bread and butter issues such as fees, bursaries, accommodation, admissions, and exclusions for their own self-interest in an astonishingly irresponsible display of political opportunism. The emergence of fees must fall towards the end of last year did see these two classes of students unite, and there was a sudden, if brief, turning against the state. The pseudo-revolutionary Minister Blade Nzimande, hi Mr. Minister Nzimande, found himself on the wrong side of the barricades, while our anti-intellectual president had suddenly to take notice of what he called clever blacks. Once the state was attacked, we saw action. Emergency funding was found, a commission of inquiry was set up, and our dictatorial president, flying in the face of all the principles of university autonomy, declared that there would be no fee increases this year. This flurry of decisions saved the government from being seen as the enemy, but it hasn't solved a single long-term problem. Since January, all student protests have again been directed inwards, but universities and NSFAS remain unable to pay their costs. And as happens when communities turn on one another, the battles have become uglier with time. Because the wider situation...
Honorable Buzoli, please take your seat. Let's hear. What are you raising on, Honorable Member?
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Can the Honorable Member take a question?
No, thank you very much for the offer. The battles have become uglier with time because the wider situation renders them intractable. Our beleaguered vice-chancellors have been humiliated and abused. Racial invective and ethnic hatred bubbles up, together with the impulses to burn and destroy. And the kinds of hostility expressed by Honourable Mkhlangu
you're out
has
of
not
order.
helped.
Stop screaming there at the back. Can you stop it, please?
The ANC breathes a sigh of relief as it no longer bears the brunt of all this. Their appeasement strategy has worked. For now, they are able to stoke up race issues where it suits them and adopt the mantle of finger-wagging peacemakers on the other hand. But the price of appeasement is always high. We will be paying that price later this year and during the course of next year when the emergency money runs out. And what of the universities themselves? These are the precious institutions that every generation has a responsibility to care for, so that the next generation may benefit. Very little care seems to be coming from rogue student groups who are in the minority and who bypass democracy in their institutions. These groups remain so wrapped up in their own narcissistic or self-interested worlds that they do not even realize that their actions undermine rather than improve access. Government, too, are part of the problem rather than the solution. Distracted by the president's willfulness on the one hand, and desperately trying to stem youth rebellion and lumpen proletarian uprisings on the other. Instead, universities have become the playthings of special interests and political opportunists. In one of its short-term attempts to address the crisis, government yesterday announced a new body to regulate university fee increases. This is excellent news for students, but is there a similar body to ensure subsidies improve? Because if fees cannot increase, subsidies must increase. Or does the government visualize a lowering of salaries, a decrease of staff per student head, a degrading of buildings, residences, libraries, classrooms and labs, and a lessening of student funding? Universities need to be recapitalized on a large scale, or the tortured agonies of economic, racial and language disputes will worsen and violence will continue and bitterness will prevail. Thank you.
Honorable Khawla.
The EFF is not blind to the irony of today's topic for debate and the people who have brought it to the attention of this House. The Freedom Front Plus and the politics they represent exactly the reason why we are where we are as a country. A country with no sense of national identity. Because for over 350 years, our people, a country with no sense of national identity, because for over 350 years, our people had their humanity undermined, their dignity impugned, and their land stolen. For over 350 years, including the last decades of the ANC rule, black people in this country that have been subjected to the naked violence of white racism. It is violence that demeans, violence that impugns the most minimum requirement for human dignity. It is violence that dispossesses not just land, but all that land represents. The sense of being, the sense of belonging, and the sense of believing that indeed the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their own dreams. The violence of racism even frowns upon black dreams. It shatters dreams because to racists, only human can dream, and blacks are not considered human. It is this subhuman conception of blacks by whites that makes it almost normal that black people earn 6 times less than white people. It is this subhuman existence that makes it acceptable that a minority of white settler community only owns 80% of the land, and that they came to their possession that land through violence, rape, and murder. Because whites want us to accept, and that they want us to accept that blacks' lives and black lived experience does not matter that much. Our society accepts that it is normal for black students to be packed like sardines in the accommodation prepared just for them by UCT, whilst their counterparts, white students, are housed in more human residences. It is for this reason as well that Jonathan Jansen, ever so quick to condemn what he deems violence by a black student, has completely refused to condemn the violence perpetrated by Freedom Front Plus supporters against black students in the University of Free State. Now that we have a new generation of black youth who question the very foundation of white privilege, rabid racists like Mr. Mulder and the defenders of white privileges, the DA and the ANC are caught literally with their pants down.
Honorable Khawla, it is unparliamentary to call any member in this house as racist. So please withdraw that, Honorable Member.
I withdraw, Chair. For too long, black people were sold dreams of a rainbow nationhood, where they are expected not to disrupt the privileges of whiteness and their own subjected the stench of vomit that whiteness has condemned their existence to be. Black people have had enough. They have had enough of being pariahs in the land of their own birth. They have had enough of landlessness, enough of being servants of Mr. Mulder's farm, and enough of being tokens in white people's insatiable desire for control and accumulation of wealth at the expense of our people. The sudden consciousness by black people from the workers of Marikana who were mowed down by the ANC in defense of white capital, to the students at UCT, Wits, Free State, and elsewhere, indicate the unraveling of the false foundations upon which the country was established. The logical direction with this consciousness can only go to is towards the reclamation of our land and the decolonization of our society and society. That Mr. Mulder is not racist, it's justice. Black people who have been subjected to violence.
Expired.
Thanks.
Honorable Sengwa.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, I'm just saddened that the ongoing finger pointing that you are, as if that solves the problem. In fact, there are white people that are racist, there are black people that are racist. Therefore, we have a situation in this country of racism which is manifesting itself. Racism must fall. Racists must fall. But condemnation is only half the exercise. It is easy to condemn. But to redress the problem is what needs to come out of this house, where together we come out with solutions. We have long passed the phase of knowing who's right and wrong. Let us build. And the finger pointing certainly does not achieve that. In 1994, South Africa, through a negotiated settlement and a progressive constitution in 1996, took a difficult but necessary route of strengthening the weak and not weakening the strong. Thus, let us upskill and develop those who are on the receiving end of apartheid to the level of the beneficiaries of apartheid. In that way, we are going to collapse old inequalities. Presbyterianism has long made the point that in South Africa, we're like a bowl of salad, where a tomato is a tomato and lettuce is a lettuce. That is the essence of our unity in diversity. We are in this together. If the tomato is rotten and the lettuce is fresh, then the salad is rotten. Therefore, every instance of racism in our country rots our discourse. The absence of leadership to unite a nation in its diversity and the failure to uplift our people out of their poverty and the continuous inflammatory rhetoric of leaders fuels the racism. Racism is a mindset, it is an attitude, and it is only through education that it can be eradicated, not through the continuous condemnation. Access to education in apartheid was very difficult. And in a free and democratic South Africa, access to education remains a difficult challenge. And once you are in, the odds are even higher. Therein lies the problem. Universities are not sensitive to the challenges of the poor who are previously and presently disadvantaged. It is the system that we need to fix. If the system is fixed, all else shall follow, because mindsets respond to systems. Let us go back to basics and ensure that there's easy access for the previously and presently disadvantaged of our people who found it difficult to enter universities. If we collapse those barriers, we will have taken a great step forward to solve the problem of racism. But let us unite.
Your time is
racism
expired,
must fall.
Member.
Racists must fall.
Honorable
United we
Shalembe.
stand, divided we fall. I thank you.
Honorable Shalembe.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, we are often reminded that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. The National Freedom Party considers this opening statement in the preamble of our Constitution as a cornerstone of our democracy and our freedom. Yet, today we are here, sadly, to debate the increase in racial tension and conflict in South Africa. From the start, the NFP says it loud and clearly that racism is disgusting and dehumanizing, and it has no place in South Africa, whom we are asking God to bless when we sing Kosikelele Africa. Remnants of racism are often at school, at the workplace, and also at universities. Recent events at the Stellenbosch, Free State, and Pretoria universities has exposed the deep-seated racism at these institutions and contributes to our collective shame for not addressing these issues adequately before. These recent incidents of racism at our universities and on social media show just how far we have strayed from the ideas laid down in our Constitution. These incidents have a detrimental effect on our unity, peace, and human coexistence. Playing the blame game or using these incidents of racism to score cheap politics points will bring us nowhere. What is needed is redress and development initiatives. We must pay attention to our use and tone of language, take into consideration the diversity of cultures in South Africa, and nurture within our homes a tolerance of racial differences towards transforming our society. Some may say the post-1994 concept of rainbow nation is a myth and will do everything in their power to discredit the racial tolerance which our late former President Nelson Mandela so passionately promoted. They are the very same people who make a point of using racial profiling when they refer to issues when in this honorable house. As long as we tolerate the deliberate fanning of racial division in our midst, we'll never be able to tackle the remnants of racism in our society. Inflaming the passion of racial polarization and calls to fight fire with fire is not the benefit of any of us in South Africa. Neither will talk of taking war to the campuses of Free State and Pretoria University bring about an end to racism in our beautiful country. Rather, let us look at ways where the majority of South Africans can come together in harmony and isolate those who stir up racial hatred, expose them and shame them. We believe that the majority of South Africans wish for peace and harmony. It is up to us to take concrete
Honorable
steps
Shelembe,
to
your
make it
time is
happen.
expired.
Pansi Ucwasana.
Honorable Kwankwa.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker and honorable members. The racial strife the Africans Must Fall campaign has caused and other critical issues raised by the Fees Must Fall campaign should rouse us from our deep rainbow nation slumber. It is clear that the majority citizens clench pent-up frustrations about an economic system that marginalizes them and their languages more than 2 decades since we attained freedom. Kenyan author Ngungi Waitonge once shared his insight into the role of language in the historical consciousness and development of nations with his words, and I quote, "It is this aspect of language as a collective memory bank of a given people which has made nations and peoples to take up arms to prevent total annihilation or assimilation of their languages, because it is tantamount to annihilating that people's collective memory of past achievements and failures which form the basis of their common identity. It is like uprooting that community from history," end quote. The ongoing racial conflict at our universities over the use of languages can, to some extent, be viewed in this context. It is an attempt by each party to, whether rightly or wrongly, act in a manner that seeks to protect and ward off an affront to its identity. But with our liberal constitution, it need not be so. For instance, it is the constitutional right of Afrikaans students to be taught in Afrikaans, and we must respect that. Similarly, it is the constitutional right of indigenous language speakers to be taught in the language of their choice, and that too must be respected. No one should foist Afrikaans on our people. The nub of the problem, however, is that we have failed to elevate the status and the use of languages of diminished use in line with Section 6, subsection 2 of the Constitution, and to develop them into academic languages that grant their speakers equal access to power and influence. Deputy Speaker, while we condemn racism, many of our students face discrimination at our schools on a daily basis, have to put up with an alienating institutional culture that makes it difficult for them to acclimatize and to compete with their white counterparts at the same level. We have to compel our universities to build an inclusive institutional culture that integrates students from diverse backgrounds in a manner that follows principles of representation, receptivity, and fairness. However, more broadly speaking, the unrest at our universities is a microcosm of South Africa's larger socioeconomic problems, which we have to urgently address. We therefore cannot remain impassive in the face of their anguished cries for help. We have to roll up our sleeves and get involved. But before we do so, our students have to commit to a disciplined, structured, and nonviolent struggle that forwards their cause. History warns us against the disastrous consequences of allowing emotions to overwhelm our ability to reason. Fellow South Africans, whatever our differences, we are all stitched together by shared history and common destiny. We are therefore all duty-bound to build a South Africa in which we all look forward to the sunrise of our tomorrow. I thank you so much.
Thank you. Honorable Madisha.
Thank you. It is utterly disappointing to see a surge in racism in our country. For the once internationally respected liberation movement to resort to racism to garner support for the upcoming local government elections is totally distressing. Mandela's vision of a colorblind South Africa, where skin color would no longer determine one's destiny, is being shattered. In 1994, South Africa embarked on an extraordinary project to celebrate our common humanity. Its high priest was the great reconciler Nelson Mandela. Humanity prayed for us to defeat the demon of racism and serve as a role model for constructive coexistence where Ubuntu prevailed. University students are better placed than most in society to defeat racism, as there is a strong nexus between colonialism and racism. University students must take the lead in intellectually defeating the colonial mindset that nurtures and keeps alive racism. Students cannot be intellectual and racist at the same time. These are mutually exclusive things. Neither can students employ violence and arson to achieve transformation. Science easily defeats all racist postulations. History reviles racism. Racism is soul destroying. Steve Biko was right to assert that there is only one race, the human race. South Africans are a diverse people only through looks and cultural practices. Otherwise, we are one people. Racism harms our cause enormously and loses us international credibility. Apartheid, we want to believe, is dead, and therefore racism should die as well. Leaders must assert that racism will be given no quarter whatsoever. Racism must be anathema to every one of us. We are Africans, each and every one of us here present and beyond. Let us decolonize our minds and thoughts. We need to see
Thank you,
ourselves
Honourable Member. Your
as
time has
Africans.
expired.
And I hope we will be able to move properly forward.
Mohlomphehi Moruti Mishwe.
House Chairperson, results of a survey by the Institute of Race Relations titled Reasons for Hope makes interesting and encouraging reading. It found that most South Africans, black and white, occupy a pragmatic middle ground on race relations. A weekend newspaper reported, and I quote, South Africa's heightened race talk has accompanied a slow economy and massive stress on jobs. A convincing majority of people surveyed agree that better education and more jobs would steadily erode the differences among races. And with this comes a strong sense of mutuality. We are in this together. As much as 85% of the people surveyed agreed with the view that different races need each other to progress, and there should be full opportunity for all people of all colors. Chairperson, this 85% we are referring to does not deny that we still have serious challenges of racism in our country. There are racists in every race group of our country who are stoking hatred and confrontation. Some even inciting violence they hope will lead to race war. Such people should be exposed and marginalized, while those who are level-headed and want to secure a great future for their children and generations to come should debate and find meaningful ways to address the issue of racism. The ACDP agrees with Higher Education Minister, Honorable Nzimande, who warned that the approach of some anti-white students on university campuses was doing more harm than good to the struggle for non-racialism. He is correct in saying, and I quote, "We want to build a non-racial society. We must confront racists and racism, but we must be above them. That is how we liberated our country," close quote. Racial tensions and conflicts in our country should not be allowed to go unchallenged. Edmund Burke once said, and I quote, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph, it takes good men and women to do nothing," close quote. Peace-loving South Africans should speak out against racism, which is hurtful, destructive, and divisive. They should speak out against those who use derogatory and demeaning names such as the K-word or F-word. They should speak out against those who put inflammatory slogans on T-shirts calling for people of certain groups to be killed. All race groups in our country need each other to make progress and improve our economy, create jobs, narrow the inequality gap, and turn this beautiful country into a model of reconciliation, peace, and prosperity, where respect for God, for one another, and for property becomes the hallmark of our legacy. In conclusion, I want to challenge all South Africans to take lessons from the piano. The piano is an instrument that has both white and black keys, which are mutually dependent. And to fully enjoy the true and potential of its soothing, sweet melodies, one must use all the keys, black and white. A new sound should emerge from South Africa, a sound that resonates with harmony and brings unity and peace. Indeed, united we stand, but divided we fall. Thank you.
Ra leboga. Motlhomphegi Jafta.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chair, I must first say that I don't think we are doing justice to the citizens of this country by debating on the matter that is racism today, after we have firstly shown them the opposite of what we are now saying in the beginning of this sitting. I believe that transformation needs to start with us as members of parliament first. Nonetheless, Honorable Chair, since the dawn of democracy in 1994, or even early as 1990, when political leaders like Tata Madiba were released from prison, the eyes of the entire world were on South Africa, and everybody believed it was the end of racism in this country. The expectation that racism has died. 16 years later, it showed its evil face once again, and most unfortunately, this very fifth parliament of the Republic has clearly shown that racism is rooted, this time arrogantly, in this country. We all know that racism has a negative impact on every individual that is experiencing it, as well as the wider community. This feeling of superiority of one person or group over another has had devastating consequences on the building of a non-racial, non-sexist, and democratic South Africa. We all, therefore, including those howling, need to join hands and condemn this practice, Honorable Chair. What should worry us most is where this country goes than where it comes from. Our painful history must not become something to live on, but must be used to guide this country towards a non-racist, non-sexist, and democratic South Africa. Yes, laws have been designed to rid us from racism, and policies are in place, but still it is difficult for people to embrace each other's culture, color, and lifestyle. Incidents of racism among students in universities are on the rise rather than calming down. That makes us, Honorable Chair, as the AIC, to believe that there should be a continuous dialogue on this matter, as it won't just disappear because it has a long history, dating as far back as 1652, when the Dutch landed on our shores.
Thank
we call
you.
upon all the peace-loving citizens of this country
Thank you,
to
Honorable
come together
Jafta.
and fight this demon. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Posa.
Honorable Chair, Honorable Ministers, Honorable Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Well, my response to all the negative issues that were raised by Professor Pozzoli on this platform is that there is only one solution, ma'am. The solution is total transformation of the institutions of higher learning. And we need willingness by all those who are in leadership to assist in ensuring that total transformation. Well, to Honorable Member Hlongwa, you are so right, sir. Blame shift game is not a solution to racism, but avoidance and postponement to deal with the problems head on. Working together with all of you sitting here, we can do more. Well, Honorable Chair, Merriam-Webster defines racism as a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. According to UNESCO, racism includes racist ideologies, prejudice attitudes, discriminatory behavior, structural arrangements, and institutional practices resulting in racial inequality. South African society, including education system, was based on discrimination and racism for a long time. This is illustrated by Verwoerd's introduction of Bantu education system, which put Bantu education under the control of a state committed to white supremacy and the pursuit of these racist policies through education. Thanks God, this is now something of the past, but we need your cooperation in working together with the government of the day, because this government has, yes, I am referring to you. I cannot listen to you if you don't listen and you don't respond to this, the ANC-led government's policies. You are expected to do that like yesterday. Today, 22 years down the line, we're dealing with these problems that could be avoided earlier. We could have avoided this if you did not become resistant. Our country was well known, listen to this one. Our country was well known for racism among the nations of the world during the apartheid era. It is no surprise that attitudes and practices of the past continue and sometimes develop in new ways. I agree, hashtag racism must fall. Since our democracy, the ANC-led government has promulgated laws and introduced policies that do away with apartheid legislation and policies in education. These policies introduce new values informing teaching and learning, research and curriculum, which intends to promote non-racialism. Regardless of these new laws and new values introduced, inequality still exists in our education system, and there are clear connections between race and class, which give rise to discrimination and racism in our post-apartheid South Africa. Our role as a broader society is to look carefully at our education system. Not only the committee, the broader society at large. We've got to look carefully at what is happening there. And on behalf of our children or students, we rise up and act against all the wrongdoings that are happening, which we left in the hands of the youth that today has decided to express them in the form of violence. Shortly after 1994, South Africa, thank you very much. Shortly after 1994, South Africa agreed to the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. As a country, we are bound by declarations such as UNESCO's Declaration on Race and Racial Prejudices. Our constitution is one of the best, I'm talking about the best of the best in the world. It prescribes commitment to human dignity, non-racialism and non-sexism, and also reinforces the Bill of Rights, which provide a solid, and I repeat, a solid platform for citizenship, anti-discrimination education in the post-apartheid South Africa. Neville Alexander and Salim Vali, in their book Racism and Education, argue that race is not a valid biological entity. Therefore, any claim that human species can be subdivided into so-called races is simply untrue, end quote. So, no race should see itself as above other races. This also applies to our institutions of higher learning. Instead, people's behavior based on the belief in race makes it possible for racist politicians and other people with money power to mobilize their followers on the race card. Because of the supposedly existence of race, cultural practices, job reservations, separate institutions have become uncritically accepted as normal. This is very wrong and has to change, and it has to change now. Presently, the country is confronted by racism at universities, in education and employment. In 2015, we observed a series of student protests by movements established at different institutions to deal with the issue of transformation and racism. Rhodes Must Fall, Open Stellenbosch, Open Rhodes at Rhodes University, to mention but a few. These were born out of the simmering frustrations on the lack of and slow pace of transformation at universities. Silence does not mean people are content with what is happening around them. I'm sure we've learned something from this one. This year is barely 3 months old, but we have already witnessed ugly scenes of what appears to be incidents that are linked to racism on at least 3 campuses in our country. The incidents relating to hashtag Shackville at the University of Cape Town, hashtag Afrikaans Must Fall, and anti-white campaign by protesters at the University of Pretoria, and the conflict at the University of Free State rugby field have threatened to polarize students and staff at higher education institutions along racial lines. This is certainly something that has no place or space in a democratic South Africa. Least of all at universities that are by their very nature supposed to be paragons of tolerance and mutual respect. As a nation in nation building, we are capable of joining our hands together, as demonstrated by the students in Pretoria when they prayed together, illustrating that they see beyond the differences in our skin pigmentation. These incidents of racism, violence, and damage to property are unfortunately unacceptable, and all of us, and I mean all of us, should strongly condemn them with the contempt they deserve. Whilst the students have the right to protest, they also have the responsibility to ensure that they do so within the confines of the law. Columnist Austin Stollows cautioned against crossing a line that divides protest from riot. When people protest, he says, it is their prerogative to make their voices heard. Riot, on the other hand, is when the aggrieved party becomes the problem. The challenge with crossing this line is that riotous action clouds the legitimacy of the issues that have to be brought to the fore. As the committee in our oversight function, we have, since the beginning of the 5th Parliament, persistently said that transformation in institutions of higher learning is neither negotiable nor can it be postponed. Higher education institutions need to transform and need to transform now, taking into consideration the liberatory and universalist understanding of education, is that it involves the fullest development of the individuals regardless of race, and the importance of developing their critical thinking as part of a democratic collective. To counter against racism, we have to learn to respect people's human dignity. And to fight against racism, we have to speak up and never allow racist remark to pass. To remedy the scourge, we've got to conduct educational programs and anti-racism campaigns in our schools, residential areas, and social institutions as a redress of racist policies of the past. In conclusion, the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation have this to say, I quote, "We cannot afford to gloss over our differences as a multicultural society and the legacy of our history of segregation, which is still in existence in our society. Our homes, schools, churches, and workplaces continue to bear testimony to this. The question of racism must invariably remain in the public limelight so that South Africans can engage with it in public forums and the media in order to guard this country against any form of divisions. Consistent denunciation of racism by top government leadership, as well as other leaders, talking even political party leaders in different spheres of our society, would be important in promoting coexistence, especially to young growing minds. We are there as their role models, not to destroy them. Racism is a scourge that humiliates both the perpetrator as well as the victim, and so we need to guard ourselves against it, lest we all lose our dignity. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Kasim.
Honorable Chairperson, the hour is drawing late. Late for South Africans from all walks of life to stand up and say, this far and no further. After much more than 150 million rand in damages to our universities, the blatant assault of black students at a rugby game at the University of the Free State, white students marching against black students at the University of Pretoria, with an anti-white campaign at the same university, Honorable Corne Mulder calling on the EFF to be crushed, and Honorable Julius Malema saying that we will crush you too, SASCO declaring war on AfriForum, and the EFF posting how to make petrol bombs, advocating for them to be thrown at colonialists. Certainly, it is time to draw a line in the sand against racism and violence. This includes taking responsibility. Political parties and leaders have played a toxic role in dividing South Africans along racial lines and advocating violence. It has come from all sides. Those responsible for violent rhetoric like the EFF must pay for the damages it has caused. You can't just steal the futures of our students and think it is fine. Those responsible for divisive rhetoric must come together.
Honourable House Chair. Honourable House Chair.
Honorable Kasim, please take your seat. On what point are you raising, Honorable Paulson?
Honourable House Chair, the Honourable Member shouldn't come and mislead the House and lay the blame for the destruction of property at
Honourable
the feet
Member.
of the EFF. He must withdraw that, Honourable Chair.
No.
No, Honourable Chair.
Honorable Member, there's nothing to withdraw. This is a debate. Or continue, Honorable...
He cannot come and mislead the House,
Honorable Paulson, please take your seat. Continue, Honorable Kasim.
Those responsible for divisive rhetoric must be called upon to pledge reconciliation and redress. If they refuse, they must be condemned to the dustbin of history. This is the responsibility of all South Africans that want a prosperous, free and fair South Africa. The scourge of racism can only be fought with reconciliation and redress. The politicians and political parties that are fueling racial divisions are doing so for their own political ends. They know just as well that fighting racism with racial division is like engaging in sexual intercourse for virginity. The ANC has become intellectually bankrupt. Their election strategy is not...
Order, honorable members. Order. Order. Continue, Honorable Kasim.
My time. The election strategy is not vote for us because we can govern better, but rather vote for us because we are not white. And they have done everything that they can to divide South Africans for political ends while spitting on Nelson Mandela's legacy. The legacy of a leader who taught us that our scars would not be healed by more hatred, but only by love and understanding. A leader incarcerated for 27 years for fighting against racial domination, who was the embodiment of forgiveness and reconciliation. The DA is the only party that has inherited this project of reconciliation, which the ANC has abandoned. The escalating racial tensions, Honourable Chairperson, have not taken place in a vacuum. These politicians can only divide South Africans if the conditions allow them to. These conditions for divisions are created when former black universities are neglected, as they are not on Minister Nzimande's state captured to-do list. They are created when poor, mostly black students are not funded or set up to fail and are subjected to inferior living and learning experiences. They are created when aspiring black academics are not funded and supported by the state. They are created when, after 22 years, nothing is done to develop African languages as mediums of instructions, and the list is endless. Minister Blade Nzimande and the ANC have no interest in the lives of black students. To him, black lives do not matter unless they can be used to divide South Africans for political ends. When the Leicester video was released last year, Honourable Blade Nzimande jumped to grandstand, and Honourable Posa was speaking before me now, called an emergency meeting of the Higher Education Portfolio Committee to summon Stellenbosch University. He was jumping, and it's right, he must jump. But why didn't he jump when the University of Fort Hare was close to collapse just 1 week after that? Where was his kangaroo-like tendencies then? This oblivious minister actually said earlier this year that the little increase in funds to NSFAS that we got after the Fees Must Fall protest was because of him and not because of the students who rose up and were met with violence and ridicule. Honourable Chairperson, the only prosperous way forward for South Africa and our students is through meaningful reconciliation and redress. The DA represents the silent majority who want opportunities for all in South Africa that is free and fair. It is not too late, but the hour is late. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Honourable Minister of Arts and Culture.
Siyabonga sihlalo ongqongqoshe abakhona namasekela abo malunga ahloniphekile eParliament maqabane nabangani. Namhlanje usuku olubaleke kakhulu, usuku lomama umhlaba wonke. Engicabanga ukuthi kufanele konke sikwenzayo sikukhumbule lokho. Usuku lwembokodo. Malibongwe. Lenyanga esikuyo kaNdasa nonyaka. Inyanga la sikhumbula khona amalungelo abantu ngaphansi kwesiqubulo ukuthi iningizimu Afrika ayihlangane ilwisane nokucwasana ngebala. Kufanele ke sikhumbule lonto ukuthi kwenzeka lokhu eyintweni esizibonayo zenzeka ikakhulukazi ema-university. Lolu dlambedlu olukhona esilibona lwenzeka nokucwasana ngokwebala. Kanjalo futhi nasemphakathini njoba sizwileke ukuthi abanye bethu behlela kulendlu babambe iqhaza ekuhlukaniseni isizwe sakithi. Kodwa kufanele siqale ekuqaleni. Yebo, kufanele kubuyiswane. Kodwa kufanele futhi sivumelane ukuthi yini lesibuyisana kuyona. Singobani sisukaphi. To start with, South Africa was conquered by force, and up to 1994, it was ruled by force. Between 1652 and 1994, the South African nation state was characterized by ongoing, mostly violent conflict between oppressors and the oppressed. So the problems we are dealing with today are not the problems of 5 years or 10 years ago. Whether we're talking about violent conduct between Van Riebeeck and his company on the one hand, and the foremost indigenous South Africans, the Khoi and the San on the other, the British imperial expansion policy after the discovery of diamonds in the latter part of the 19th century, where African kingdoms were overpowered and their land dispossessed, or effects of the South African War, the so-called Anglo-Boer War. In all this, the thread that runs through is violent subjugation of the majority, racial superiority, and class exploitation. The objects of the liberation struggle was to undo the legacy of colonial apartheid, characterized as colonialism of a special type, where a colonized nation and colonizing nation shared one geographic space. I will come to you. Our agenda seeks to create a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous South Africa. In 1994, our democracy inherited a state without a nation. This is the instance where colonial conquest brought together different communities in one state, but this very conquest was used by the colonizers to divide and try to prevent the unity of these communities into a nation. It is against this backdrop that we understand our task of nation building and social cohesion, of which the latter is the practical expression of the former, inspired by the South African historical experiences. Nation building concept find practical expression in the Freedom Charter and upheld in the Constitution of the Republic, adopted in 1996, 20 years this year. The expressions like South Africa belongs to all who live in it and unity in diversity underline our resolve to uproot any form of exclusion, be it racially, economically, socially, culturally, et al. It speaks to common destination with diverse inclinations inherent in human nature. The National Development Plan, Chapter 15, enjoins us to build a socially coherent nation, and as a result of which, our government has adopted Outcome 14, which is about nation building and social cohesion. The 5 main outputs of our program are fostering constitutional values, mainly about the Bill of Rights, about the Bill of Responsibility, together with the national symbols. Equal opportunities, inclusion and redress, to improve enforcement of Employment Equity Act and changing attitude and behavior, especially on gender, xenophobia, and others. Promoting social cohesion across society through increased interaction across race and class, using both sports, arts, and cultural activities to realize this goal. Promoting active citizenry and leadership to improve participation in national and local government elections and participation in community-based processes. Fostering social compact, crafting this compact for democratic, equal, and prosperous society, shared values, and national identity. Unless as South Africans, we come together and discuss and agree what our national identity as South Africans is, we will still be far from the nation building and social cohesion agenda. We have chosen a path of this painstaking journey of building and not destruction, of progress and not regress. We are doing this conscious of our history having thrusted upon us its dastardly alter ego, the remnants of racist ideology that seeks to perpetuate itself with its horrors, vested privileges, embedded interest in a country fraught with the effects of economic, social, cultural divisions imposed by centuries of colonialism, segregation, and apartheid. We will defeat this pernicious ideology of racism by involving all progressive forces of our society. We will succeed through our firm focus on the strategic goal of creating a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic and prosperous South Africa. Racism should be eradicated in the entire universe and in our country, as it is one of the great evils of our time. As O.R. would have said, bedevils human relations between individuals, within and between nations, and across continents. It brutalizes the entire peoples, destroys persons, warps the process of thought, and injects into human society a foul tension, mutual antagonism, and hatred. It demeans and dehumanizes both victim and practitioner, locking them into vile relationship of master race and Untermensch, superior and underling, each with his position defined by race. Racism is not merely a prejudice. It is both ideological and systemic. Racism manifests itself throughout almost all institutions in our society. Today we are talking about institutions of higher learning, but tomorrow we'll be talking about other institutions, because what you are dealing with is an institutionalized racism which we are uprooting. We should remember that our struggle was always about uplifting the quality of life of all South Africans, especially the poor, the majority of whom are Africans and female. At the same time, it has the effect of liberating the white community from the false ideology of racial superiority and the insecurity attached to oppressing others. Humanity is under obligation to punish and suppress this crime. Its perpetrators cannot be suppressed by means of words or persuasion alone to desist from the commission of this type of crime. The recent challenges are the reflections of the unwillingness of certain sections of our society to accept the fundamentals of transformation. In recent weeks, we have also witnessed student protests reach levels of stridency and frustration that too have appeared to polarize into black and white. We reiterate that the destruction of property, the loss of life and limb will never be condoned at any time. It is an act of regress, and there is nothing progressive or revolutionary about it, as some would have said. Whilst the struggle for transformation in institutions of learning should be accelerated, that should take place in a disciplined fashion. That's a true trait of a revolutionary. Anyone espousing such anarchic behavior is a true advocate of modern ultra-leftism. This is a left-wing infantile disorder in character whose main feature is subjectivism, a confusion of what is desirable with what is actually and immediately possible. Political parties in this House should desist from fanning the flames of such warped ideologies. Neither should we become apologists of racism and racists. We should not tolerate racism and racists in our organization. If within a space of 2 months you discover that your party is a hotbed of racists, like some amongst us in this House, leadership must prevail. Whether it's a little sparrow or Honorable Kola Barnett or Trollip, we will judge your commitment through their expulsion without picking and choosing those you think you have to. When you preside over a racist organization, you also become racist by association. As the leader of the opposition would say, you are actually the real sellout, selling out the people who fought for this freedom. I think we should be frontal. We should not say we don't tolerate racism, but we tolerate it. You expel someone, a month later you take a person back into the benches. That's not the commitment. What is to be done? Firstly, we should, all of us, unanimously reject racism and isolate racists in our midst. We should take a firm stand on justice and equality. We should deepen our program of de-educating the old ways and re-educating into the new ethos of transformation and progress. We should always mobilize society to strengthen the pillar of mass mobilization of our transformation agenda. Involve all peace-loving South Africans, majority to implement our program of uniting for a non-racial society. Build a broad national front against racism and expand it beyond the borders of our country. Call upon all South Africans, all the compatriots, to contribute in shaping the policy to combat racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerances. Continue with the program of dialogue. We should dialogue. That should be uppermost in our approach. This thing of people preaching war is not going to help, but jaw will, if we are to build this society. We should convene different social partners to craft social compacts on the values which we will agree as South Africans that these are the values we share. Some of the things which are happening in society here, including in this house, can never be values somebody who respects himself will identify himself with or herself with. We should convene this so that at the end of the day, a national convention on nation building comes up with the way forward, particularly on our identity. And in that way, we'll be able to go forward. But as I end, let me raise the point, the Honorable Mulder, and actually thank the fact that Parliament is discussing this matter. Don't run away from it. Discuss it all the time as parliamentarians, because this is what we are faced with. This monster has to be faced with, confronted, dealt with, because it made people to suffer. People died. Today, we cannot tolerate racism. Let's fight it. Thank you.
Okay. Dankie, achtbare leden. Dat brengt ons ten einde van die debat en die bezigheid van die dag, die hees is vandaag.